right, something to follow. Thank you very much, all three of you. Appreciate it. So last but not least, let me share with you what's going on with the last panel. It's a stakeholder panel. We have 4 people. We're going to hear from each of them for about 5 minutes each. 2 from the industry. So coming up is Suzanne Noble. She's Vice President of the Production Regions and Sacramento Affairs for the Western States Petroleum Association. Joining her will be Rock Zierman, Chief Executive Officer from the California Independent Petroleum Association. And from perhaps a different perspective, but we'll wait and see on that, Brianna Mordick, Staff Scientist, Natural Resources Defense Council. And Brianna, make sure you tell me if there's anything I don't know about new technologies in your presentation. That's how I found out the last one. And Andrew Greenberg, Oil and Gas Program Manager for the Clean Water Action. So should we go in that order? Suzanne, go ahead.
Good afternoon, I guess almost evening. Madam Chair and committee members. Again, my name is Suzanne Noble, and I'm the Vice President of Production Regions and Sacramento Affairs for the Western States Petroleum Association, also known as WSPA. We appreciate the opportunity to address the committee today and your interest in this important subject matter. I do have some prepared comments. We have spoken at great length on several of the topics within my prepared comments, so I will make these briefer. California's oil and gas producers today operate under a new and very challenging regulatory environment because of the requirements of SB 4. And as you know, the California legislature responded, as talked about earlier in 2013, to the growing concerns and questions about the long-established practice of hydraulic fracturing by adopting the most stringent statute regulating well stimulation by far in the country. SB 4 established a new, comprehensive, and challenging framework for the continued use of various well stimulation techniques in California. And as you know, as we've talked about, the permanent regulations were adopted and finalized in December. And those regulations do satisfy the goals and requirements of SB 4 by setting requirements in the areas of ensuring neighbor notification, ensuring water well testing and monitoring after well stimulation, also along with post-well stimulation reports to the agencies, seismic monitoring, and appropriate storage and handling of well stimulation fluids. Also, the regulations require operators to provide specific information regarding volume, composition, disposition of well stimulation fluids to the division, and of course the division is to make the information available on their website. On January 14th, the Department of Conservation did publish their draft environmental impact report, the EIR, and from WSPA's perspective, the release of that draft on well stimulation operations does mark an important required milestone in meeting the requirements of Senate Bill SB 4. WSPA and other members, WSPA and most of our members are reviewing the details of the draft EIR and look forward to continuing to participate in the division's public meetings and public comment process regarding this requirement, as we did last night and the other additional 5 hearings taking place within the 2 to 3 weeks. Busy day on January 14th. Also, the CCTS Volume 1 study was released, as we've talked about, and we do appreciate the hard work that went into this study, and it's also on its way to implementing another requirement of SB 4. Just want to make one comment on the report. I think it establishes a clear foundation of fact and peer-reviewed science upon which further evaluated well stimulation treatments in California, and of course the role of new SB 4 regulations will play in future energy production. In particular, the report does demonstrate that well stimulation practices in California do differ from those in other states, reflecting the different geology. In general, the CCTS report, or CCST report, concludes that practices and impacts from hydraulic fracturing in the state in other states do not directly apply to current hydraulic fracturing here in the state of California. And as we just discussed, we have two other challenging key elements within SB4. That's the development of the groundwater monitoring criteria, as well as the implementation thereafter of a regional groundwater monitoring programs. The State Water Board is required to develop this groundwater monitoring criteria in consultation with the division as well as the stakeholders. And we're hoping that the outlined approach to implement the regional scale groundwater monitoring programs during well stimulation activity will reflect or be developed and reflect sound science and effective practices for groundwater monitoring. WISP and its members will continue to engage with the State Water Board in ongoing public stakeholder process. In conclusion, I want to thank you again for your interest in this issue. California's energy producers have demonstrated they are leaders in innovation and environmental stewardship. They operate in one of the most heavily regulated environments in the world, and they do that in harmony with their neighbors and their communities. And they provide essential supply of energy that keeps our economy and citizens moving forward. We are committed to continuing our collaboration with the state and other stakeholders and the legislature in finishing the job of successfully implementing SB4. We do understand that you and your constituents have an expectation that energy producers will operate in a responsible, transparent, safe manner as required by SB4, and we look forward to meeting those expectations and exceeding them. Thank you for your time.
And let's go ahead and hear from Rock Zimmerman.
Rock Zimmerman, California Independent Petroleum Association. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members for sticking it out and being here to hear us. In the interest of time, I'll skip the remarks and just address some of the specific issues that have been raised. Senator Allen, you asked about Inglewood Field, so I just wanted to address that. The Inglewood oil field is actually in the county of Los Angeles, not the city, and it's its own community service district now. Back in 2011, they created that as a legal settlement between the county, the operator, PXP, and neighborhood associations and NGOs. Part of that legal settlement was a requirement from PXP to hydraulically fracture 2 wells in order for it to be scientifically tested. They did that, and as a result, there was a 250-page peer-reviewed scientific study on hydraulic fracturing in the Inglewood field. That's the only time that well stimulation has taken place in the Inglewood field. Relative to the city of Los Angeles, there is no hydraulic fracturing happening anywhere in the city of Los Angeles. Also, just on the injection well issue, it is a convoluted issue, and a lot of things get put together, and so it gets confusing. I just wanted to make the point that we're largely a water company. 95% of what we're pulling out of the ground is brackish water. Typically water you would never want to use for any other purpose, and it has a little bit of oil and gas. We take the oil and gas out and re-inject the water back, typically in the same reservoir from which it came. This is all in a closed loop system so that that water does not hit the atmosphere or employees or anything else. So it's a closed loop system, which is primarily the reason why DTSC has not been involved. And it has primarily been between Dogger and the Water Board. I would also mention that while the Water Board doesn't play a role in the water coming out, they certainly play a heavy role in the water going back in. Dogger consults them on all injection wells, and they have to now sign off on any applications for water aquifer exemptions to be qualified for it to go into those water aquifer exemptions. So just wanted to mention that. Also, on the unique nature of California oil and gas production, it's mentioned that it's low volumes of water that we use compared to other places. It's 300 acre-feet a year in water that we're using in the state of California for all of hydraulic fracturing. Compare that to 30,000 acre-feet of water we provide to Central Valley farmers through our produced water. After we take the oil and gas out, in some incidences, it's clean enough to use for irrigation purposes. So we're actually producing 100 times more water in this drought environment than we're consuming through hydraulic fracturing. Regarding analysis of the chemicals, we also benefit from the unique nature of California's hydraulic fracturing being located 99% in Kern County, 85% in a single field, because as Dr. Long said, there's a lot of challenges on evaluating all the different chemicals, but in that single field, there's only 2 fluids that are used, two fluid makeups, and so it's much more easy to analyze those chemicals in that field in the state of California versus having to analyze all chemicals throughout the country that may be used in other parts. The other thing about these chemicals, they're very common chemicals. We mentioned, Senator Stone mentioned the fact that the biggest component is guar, which you find in gum and ice cream. It's a thickener. It's used ubiquitously, but all the other things you find in Windex, you're going to find it in swimming pool cleaner, things that you can buy at Home Depot, but unlike those, we don't expose the public to it. Ours is going 2 miles deep into impermeable rock. So these are chemicals that are well known and used in other places. We do recognize that there are data gaps and they need to be solved, and I think that the industry has as much interest in that too, because a lot of this confusion arises because the data is not easily searchable. It's there, as Mr. Nicodem talked about. But for instance, on all injection wells, we now have Excel spreadsheets that describe where it is and who's the operator and what's the TDS, but we don't have all the other constituents that you can easily search. So we need to do that, and we've supported every year through the budget process the increase of Dogger's budget, and we're doing that again this year, not only for personnel at the Water Board and at the Division of Oil and Gas, but also increased monies for IT so they can start implementing and digitalize all of these reports, and I think we'd be all better served if we did. Thank you.
Thank you, Rock. Next up, Brianna, welcome back. You were at our hearing, was it 2 years ago?
I think it's been that long now,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, Madam Chair and members of the committee, thanks for the chance to come back and speak to you. I'm Brianna Mordick. I'm a petroleum geologist with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And, you know, with these new rules that were mandated by SB4, we think that they include some important standards that are crucial to reducing impacts from stimulation operations, things like significantly greater transparency as required by SB4 around things like where stimulation's happening, the identity of chemicals that are being used, the amount of water, and other important data. Things like steps to ensure that stimulation operations don't compromise the well that's being stimulated or wells nearby, and provisions to characterize groundwater both before and after stimulation occurs. However, we do continue to have significant concerns with specific technical aspects of these and some of the other provisions. In particular, we continue to be concerned about the decision to exempt many acid stimulation jobs from these rules, despite the fact that they may pose the same risks as acid jobs that are covered. And in addition, given the limited scope of the new rules, and as has been discussed, since well stimulation is only one part of the larger oil and gas production process, we think that many improvements to the entire oil and gas regulatory program are still needed, including things like how wastewater is handled, well construction rules, and how far these operations or how close they can be to things like homes, schools, hospitals, and other sensitive receptors. You know, we know that there are continued issues with data availability and consistency and quality assurance and quality control. You know, some of the data that this great new data that SB4 provides is not accessible in a format that allows you to analyze it easily. For example, you know, some of these still come to you as a PDF instead of a database. We know that Dogger's aware of that issue, but it does continue to be an issue. And then, you know, going from this point forward, now that we have the final rules, we are certainly going to be very focused on the enforcement aspect. I think as we've seen with the revelations that have come out about, you know, these more than 2,500 injection wells that have been permitted to inject into federally protected drinking water aquifers, the rules are only going to be as strong as the enforcement. We have also begun to review the EIR. Obviously, it's quite large. You know, we're supportive of the scope that we've seen so far, the type and kinds of impacts that are being evaluated. But we do have a number of concerns, and in particular, I wanted to mention a couple. One is that we think it fails to properly consider the no stimulation and geographically limited stimulation alternatives by relying on unsupported assumptions about future oil consumption. Also, because by design, the statewide review can't evaluate impacts with a high degree of specificity, the programmatic EIR should not act as the final decision document. and it should explicitly require site-specific program review for all future well stimulation, and especially well stimulation outside of existing oil fields. And we also think that it's improper for the EIR to defer important studies, such as the health risk assessment study, to the mitigation phase. You know, as the first panelist discussed, the first volume of the scientific study, of course, is out, but the second and third volumes won't be complete until at the same time that the final regs will be implemented. And so that's why we want to call formally on Dogger and DOC to create a public and transparent process for how they're going to incorporate the results of that study into the regulations and into the EIR. And we continue to believe that a moratorium on well stimulation is appropriate, given the fact that the study and EIR are being completed, despite the fact that the rules are already completed, to allow time for that information to be incorporated into the final rules. We are encouraged by the new leadership at Dogger, and we are committed to continuing to work with them and with you on the implementation of these rules. Thank you again for the chance to speak today.
Well, thank you very much. And let's hear from the last person, but for all of you, if you have things that you wanted to add on in writing, this is part of the record by writing, or after that even, please don't hesitate to contact my office, because all of you have said things I'd like to follow up on eventually, but would welcome more information. Andrew, you're batting cleanup. Go ahead. Yes, I think so.
My name is Andrew Grinberg.
Is that on? No.
Oh.
There.
Thank you.
I see a light.
Thank you, Madam Chair and member. My name is Andrew Grinberg. I'm the Oil and Gas Program Manager with Clean Water Action. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today and share with you guys some of our findings and reactions to this process with SB4. I'm going to do my best to not focus too much on all the recent news coming out about the underground injection control program. Very much looking forward to that hearing in March. It does provide some lessons, though, about how will SB4 be implemented and the agencies that are tasked with doing that. What we've seen time and time again with the oil industry is it's very difficult to regulate this industry. And I appreciate Dr. Boland's remarks that Dogger plans to effectively regulate well stimulation. However, the track record of really in every state and even at the federal government is that has been a tall order and potentially something that is not able to be done. Before getting really into the specifics of SB4, something that keeps coming up throughout this hearing is how difficult it is to pull out just the impacts of well stimulation itself. And we heard from, the scientists at the beginning through the regulators, and where we draw that line about what is well stimulation and what are impacts from oil production are things that we really need to keep in mind. And I believe it's been a problem where, industry and regulators have to focus specifically on one small definition when really we should be taking a more holistic view. And, an example with the LA Times article on the benzene issue, we end up getting into this debate about whether benzene was injected into these fracked wells or not, when really the issue is there's benzene in oil and gas wastewater, and the oil and gas wastewater regulatory program has been mismanaged for 30 years, and we've allowed the injection of wastewater and other fluids into, it looks like, thousands of wells that are in protected aquifers by the federal definition of underground source of drinking water. And the fact that there are 900 open pits across the Central Valley where that is definitely not a closed loop system where, constituents like benzene and other hazardous chemicals are off-gassing into the air and percolating into the ground. These types of lessons are the things that we see that really put doubt into our mind whether this industry can be regulated effectively and whether, a bill like SB4 can do the full job of making it safe to produce oil here in California. What we are getting from this bill is all the very valuable information and things, whether or not everything in that article was accurate, what we're seeing is that operators now have to report certain things and the public is understanding more about the risks and dangers of oil production in California. With regards to some of the specific activities of the agencies involved in implementing SB4, want to just focus in on the role of the water boards, and we're very encouraged by all the steps that that agency has taken to get a handle on oil and gas field activities. Their increased role is certainly welcome. We think that the process they've undertaken for the groundwater monitoring criteria and the regional monitoring plans has been very positive. we're very much looking forward to seeing that program fully implemented and being, enforced properly for years to come. Just to wrap it up, we understand the scope of this issue is huge, and all the agencies working on it have put a lot into it, and we've seen considerable progress across the board. We, Clean Water Action, along with pretty much every environmental group working on fracking and well stimulation in the state, is still calling for a moratorium on the practice, and Brianna highlighted a few, but I would say the lack of attention and protections from health and air quality issues would be one of them. Would love to see more participation from the Department of Public Health in taking a look at oil field impacts. The wastewater being another one, which is coming more and more to light, and is something that is in urgent need of being addressed. So overall, thank you very much for the opportunity. Looking forward to continuing to engage on this issue.
Thank you very much, all four of you, for your presentations. Brianna, I had one follow-up question for you. When you were talking about closeness to schools and homes, were you talking about in regards to fracking and acidization, or traditional oil drilling as well?
Traditional oil drilling as well, yeah, basically the entire oil and gas production process.
I think that's been some of the concerns in the Los Angeles area that we've explored, that SB4 turned out to be the vehicle to raise some concerns, but the problems were more traditional oil drilling.
Right, and it obviously took the transparency that SB4 brought to really, flesh out that question and what was happening in those
So
places.
it's primarily air quality, and if there are groundwater basins or something, potentially water quality, but primarily air quality.
Right, absolutely. Oh, yeah, and to follow up on the question you asked before, in terms of what's new out there, I mean,
Yeah.
I think the only thing I would say is that, just from my personal experience working for the oil and gas industry, there are a lot of things that the oil and gas industry does, and probably takes for granted that the public might be surprised to learn about, which is not to say that those things are necessarily nefarious, but it's just considered, it's a normal part of operation. So, you saw that from the reaction, but commonly being, well, we've been doing this for 50 years, what's the big deal? But for the public, it is a big deal because obviously they don't know about it. They don't know what's happening. And that sort of secrecy, I think, breeds distrust. And so additional transparency around all of these processes, I think, is only helpful.
We're learning more all the time. Given the fact that I've lost members, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all four of you. We've seen many of you before us before. Your voices are really important. A lot of pressure on all of us collectively to make sure we do this right, because as I told the oil industry, if there's nothing to hide, then we need to make sure everything is transparent and accountable. And when things come up, like since 2009, we have no idea how the wastewater was treated and where it is in wells and what's going on. That just creates this sort of lack of trust, if you will. Even though we're trying to move forward, we keep going backward. And so becoming a good neighbor, especially as the state changes in demographics and expansion of population over time, is going to put increasing pressures on all of us to do a good job, our water boards, our air boards, and with our attention now to greenhouse gas emissions, methane and other short-lived pollutants become incredibly important in the discussion, let alone on the health impacts. So thank you all four for being experts from your specific backgrounds. Greatly appreciated. So what we're doing with the ending, given the fact that you're only talking to myself and not only.
That's okay.
But I wanted to, before I asked if there's people in the audience that wanted to say something, if you put it in writing, that's even better because it's part of the formal record and others with them. If you have 1 minute of a comment that you are just dying to say, we'll certainly sit and listen to that. But please join me in thanking particularly Catherine Moore, who organized all this. I said, of course, we're going to do an oversight hearing on SB4, so it's up to her to pull it off, and thank you, Catherine. You did an excellent job. I thought all the panelists were timely, and I look forward to continuing discussion on March 10th when the Natural Resource and Water Committee, along with the Environmental Quality Committee, will be holding a joint hearing specifically on underground injection wells. Now, I see there's at least one person who wants to come up, right? Bill Alio.
I'm Bill Alio with the Environmental Working Group. I've been working on this for 4 years this month. In 2011, I went and asked Dogger, are we fracking? They said, no, the rest is history. A couple notes. One is on benzene does show up after you frack a well because of the hydrocarbons. But what they inject into the well as frack fluids, I don't think you'd want to drink that either. I'm not going to go over the list of chemicals, but there's other toxic elements, and it's not just guar gum or things you'd eat or brush your teeth with. But clearly, it gets more polluted when it comes up with toluene, benzene, and other heavy metals that are naturally occurring too. But my point I want to make in the 1 minute is this is the 100-year anniversary of Dogger, 2015 back to 1915. I think they've mostly served the industry and probably served them well. And I think the emphasis that this legislature is telling them the last few years is you need to serve the public and enforce the law also. I'm actually very optimistic about the new management there. The new supervisor gets that, and that he's already, like today, said, I need to reorganize some districts.
He's agreeing, he's shaking his head affirmatively.
So I think that, and the oil companies, since we started working on this issue 4 years ago, have been cooperative. They're spending vast resources in the Capitol, as reported last week, millions of dollars to lobby, but they've also never objected to increasing the assessment to fund Dogger. And so if we want this agency to be a full-service agency, not just for Occidental Chevron at all, but for the public and enforce the law, let's make them fully capable of that and fully fund them so they have enough people to digitize, to inspect well pressure tests, because I don't think they're doing that adequately. And there's a lot of stuff in the UIC as well as in SB4 that they just have to do better. So I won't elaborate on those, but I think they're going to get there, but they need the resources to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for continuing to provide oversight over our oversight on all this. Greatly needed and appreciated. Senator Stone, any closing comments? This is your first hearing with Natural Resources and Water. The year is young.
Great afternoon. Listening to the testimony today and getting quickly educated on water injection and groundwater monitoring, and appreciate the work that you've done in the past, and look forward to working with you and our colleagues. And look at our next hearing is March
10th.
March 10th. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Very good. Well, I look forward to working with you this year because this is so important.
Yeah.
Care about public health implications and groundwater supply. We've got to get this right. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for your attendance. Have a great evening.